The Punisher looks like that he should be one of the easiest Marvel characters to make intimidating. He wears black, he has a massive white skull on his chest, and usually there's a lot of guns involved. Compared with someone like Spider-Man or Ghost Rider, there really isn't that much to his design. But when I started working on this piece, I realised that's actually what makes him difficult, because there isn't much to hide behind. If the pose doesn't feel threatening, or the expression feels wrong, or that skull isn't doing enough visually, you're basically left with a guy just in tactical gear. So while you watch me create this artwork for Divide Music's Punisher-inspired song Fade to Black, I want to talk you through.
When I first started sketching this, I thought the expression was probably going to do most of the work.
Is a character
Get
where
Frank
doing
looking
less
angry enough,
actually
push the
puts more
guns
pressure
towards the camera,
on every
make
decision.
the pose aggressive, and you're probably somewhere close. That's why I went for this very confrontational perspective straight away. He isn't standing at a distance looking cool, he's coming towards the viewer. Both arms are pushing out of the frame, and the camera is basically right in the middle of whatever is happening. At this stage, I wasn't really thinking about costume detail. I was mostly asking whether the pose felt uncomfortable enough. And I mean uncomfortable in a good way. I want it to feel like you shouldn't really be standing where the camera is. The closer I pushed those weapons towards the edge of the composition, the more the whole image started to feel like an actual moment rather than a character pose. But once I started developing Frank himself, I ran into a bigger problem. Punisher doesn't have a mask. That sounds obvious, I know, but it changes a lot. With Spider-Man, I can tilt the head, narrow the eye shapes, push the shoulders, and you'll read an emotion even though you can't see his face. With Frank, there's nowhere to hide any of that. If I overdo the expression, he starts looking cartoonish. If I underplay it, the image loses the aggression completely. So I kept going back and forth on the face, trying to make it feel intense rather than just angry superhero. I wanted the mouth to feel ugly, the eyes are tight, there's a lot of tension through the nose and brow. He shouldn't look composed here. And initially I thought, right, that's probably the main focal point sorted. Then I put the skull in, and suddenly the face wasn't the strongest thing in the image anymore. If I shrink the artwork down, Frank's face starts disappearing quite quickly, but the skull doesn't. It's this massive white graphic shape sitting in the center of a mostly dark character, so your eye goes there almost immediately. That's obviously useful because you know exactly who you're looking at, but it also means there are now basically two faces competing for attention, Frank's actual face and the symbol underneath it. That was the point where the design became more interesting to me, because the answer wasn't to make the skull quieter. If anything, that would defeat the point of using Punisher. The skull should be loud, so instead I needed to give Frank enough visual weight around it that he didn't just become a mannequin carrying this really recognizable logo. That is where the lighting started becoming much more important. I pushed a lot of the warmer light into his face and the upper body, especially around cheekbones, forehead, and edges of the skin. So hopefully the skull grabs you first from a distance, and then your eye moves upward towards Frank. And I quite like that order. You recognize the symbol first, then you meet the person behind it. Once I noticed what was happening, it also changed how I approached the rest of the costume. There was a temptation to keep adding things here because tactical characters can swallow detail forever. For example, like more straps, more armor, more pouches, more little bits of equipment. But I don't actually think more tactical detail makes Punisher more convincing. Past a certain point, it starts pushing him towards a fairly generic military character. And Frank already has one of the strongest graphic symbols in comics sitting in the middle of his chest. I don't need another sixth thing competing with it. So most of the gear is there to make him feel grounded and functional, but I tried not to make any of it the reason you look at the image. The interesting thing with Punisher is that the more exaggerated you make everything around him, the less frightening he can become. If he starts feeling superhuman, some of the tension kind of disappears. A lot of his visual appeal comes from the fact that he still looks like a man who's walked into a situation that should probably kill him. That grounded quality became more important as I started working on the weapons. The guns obviously identify the kind of character we're dealing with, but compositionally, they're also pushing everything outward. One arm drives towards the top right and the other pulls towards the opposite side, and Frank is basically trapped between those two directions. I exaggerated the perspective on the gun closest to us quite a bit, not because I wanted to show off the perspective, but because I wanted the viewer to feel physically close to the action. That's something I've been thinking about more with these process pieces. Sometimes you can draw a really aggressive pose, but if the camera is sitting comfortably 20 feet away, the image, it still feels safe. Here, I wanted the camera to feel like it was somewhere it probably shouldn't be. And once the muzzle flashes went in, that helped carry those diagonals even further outside the frame. The background was another place where I deliberately kept things fairly ordinary. At first, I was playing around with explosions, but then eventually, I changed it to a brick wall. There's nothing particular superhero about it, and I think that kind of helps. If I'd put Frank in some enormous burning cityscape, it might have made the image bigger, but I'm not sure if it would have made him more convincing, if that makes sense. Punisher works well in spaces that feel real enough that you can imagine somebody actually getting hurt there. The red and blue lighting came in quite late, and I knew it could very easily make the whole thing look too polished. That colour combination is almost automatically cinematic, so I tried to rough it up a bit. As you'll see later, the bricks catch colour unevenly, large areas disappear completely, the skin gets quite harsh in places, then you've got these bright muzzle flashes cutting through everything. It's not supposed to feel like Frank has been beautifully lit for a photo shoot. It's more like the environment is lighting him in fragments as the scene is happening. And that also ties nicely into the title of the song, because this piece was for Divide Music's track Fade to Black, and I didn't want to interpret that too literally. I could have just made the artwork darker and called it a day, but what interested me more was having parts of Frank almost disappear. The lower body starts falling away, parts of the weapons vanish into shadow, the background behind him gets very dark, but the skull stays, his face stays, and the muzzle flashes stay as well. So there's this tension between parts of the image being swallowed by black, and then there's these elements just refusing to disappear. Looking at the finished piece now, I think that's probably the thing I find most interesting about Punisher as a design. He's incredibly simple on paper, but that simplicity makes weak decisions really obvious. If the pose isn't convincing, you notice. If you lose the skull, he starts becoming just another tactical character. And if you over-design the costume, the thing that makes him recognizable starts getting buried beneath all that. And if you push the violence so far that he stops feeling human, I think you lose some of what makes him unsettling in the first place. So I went into this thinking the job was basically to make Frank look as aggressive as possible. And by the end, I don't really think that was the problem I was solving. It was more about keeping everything around that very simple visual identity believable enough that the skull still meant something. The face, the lighting, the environment, the weapons, they all needed to make that symbol feel like it belonged to this person rather than just being printed on top of him. And I think that is why Punisher is harder to design than he actually looks. There aren't that many ingredients to it. You just really notice when one of them just isn't working properly. And let me know what you think of the finished artwork and which version of the Punisher has always worked best for you visually. It can be comics, films, games. I'm interested in what people see as the definitive version. I'll also put a link to Divide Music's Fade to Black below so you can hear the song the artwork was actually created for. And if you enjoy these kinds of videos where I use the drawing process to actually dig into why a character works visually, then please subscribe, as I'll be doing a lot more of these. And for the artists watching, my book, The Profitable Artist, covers portfolios, positioning, pricing, and working professionally with clients. The link to that is in the description below, and as always, thank you for watching.